angers me. It angers me simply because it is, there is no justification for it, except for administrators at higher levels, at the highest level, not really caring to work with the reality of having systems that work. This is basic.
There's always been immigrants to this country, right? Unless you're Native American or Alaska Native, your family either came as immigrants or came as enslaved people, and in most cases, unless you were from England or Ireland, your family didn't speak English. So this has always been a country where generation after generation has had to learn English when they came to this country. But the idea of ESOL in public schools is very recent. For the first couple hundred years of the U.S. history, people learned English in their church or their synagogue or some kind of neighborhood organization. And there wasn't a lot of support for learning English in the public schools. And really, it wasn't until the 20th century and starting kind of between the 1950s and 1970s when we started to think of that as another subject in public schools.
You're relatively recently new to the country and you don't have a great grasp yet of the English language, you are penalized for it in your high school placement. And to me, that is unjust and unfair. And so, Somos has been doing a phenomenal job and trying to change the not only the conversation, but change the policy. Actually, with Somos yesterday, for the last 2 years, they've been advocating to increase enrollment of English language learners at the selective schools, City, Poly, Western, School for the Arts. We know that the numbers are very low and that in time, every child should have an opportunity to go to any school.
To provide good, high-quality education is required by the state constitution, but we have some counties that are wealthier and do a pretty good job. They could do better, but they do a pretty good job. And we have some counties in Baltimore City which are poorer. They have a smaller tax base, or they spend more of their money on policing or other things like that compared to education, and they're not even close to meeting that constitutional mandate. There were some serious lawsuits in the 1970s. I mean, that's what it takes many times when we're talking about school desegregation, when we're talking about providing services for English language learners. It's not some powerful person woke up in the morning and felt their heart open up to immigrants or open up to black people and say, oh yeah, I want to do something good for them. They were forced to do it by community organizing and by lawsuits, which showed the discrimination that was happening. And that's still a problem. Looking at ESOL students as from a deficit lens, they don't have English yet versus they have some English and they have a lot of Spanish or a lot of Mandarin or whatever the case may be. So the 1970s and into the 1980s were really when the idea of classes for ESOL started to percolate. The students that I'm most worried about are the students who are coming in 7th grade, students who are coming in 8th grade, and then have to start an entirely different school in 9th grade for high school, and they don't know how to apply to high schools. And that's another big issue, is the most competitive high schools discriminating against ESOL students in their entrance exams, so City and Poly and Western and others. So I'm concerned about how middle school ESOL teachers are being supported, and I'm really concerned about the way that ESOL students are being tracked into Douglas and Digital and Benjamin Franklin and a couple other schools, and their families don't have the same information about how to apply to the competitive schools, and even if they did, the composite scores for testing don't take into account that, well, their English score might be a little bit lower, but if you tested their Spanish, they'd be way higher, that they're bringing something extra to the table at a city or a poly that should be valued and not held against them. So I think that's another place where we're seeing discrimination happening, and to be successful, maybe you don't need a PhD or a master's or even a bachelor's degree, but post-secondary training to be an electrician, to get an associate's degree, to improve your English writing skills. Like, these are things that everyone needs to be successful in this economy.
But what is the value of a high school diploma if the whole school experience and the whole educational experience has not properly prepared them for good job training or good community college education or good four-year college education? It doesn't matter whether these students have studied in the public school system or not. It doesn't matter. But especially since we serve the high-risk population of Baltimore City, why have we been unable to provide quality education? We have made excuses. Where administrators have made decisions. What is the process? What does the school system do to help this young immigrant child whose first language is not English get the language skills they need so that when they sit in classes with their American counterparts, those who have English as a first language, those who grew up here, those who were born here, how do we prepare those students for success?
Since the students are amazing, the students bring so much to the table. The challenge is that the systems of education in Baltimore, whether it's higher education, K through 12 or early childhood education, are drastically underfunded compared to almost any other county in the state. And we're talking about the richest state in the country, more millionaires per capita here than any other state in the country, higher median income here than any other state in the country. It's not that we can't afford to do better in Maryland. It's that we're not choosing. Our politicians aren't choosing to fund our schools. They're choosing to let Baltimore City schools in particular fail our students and fail to prepare them for success.
The change in the fair student funding formula and the way poverty is calculated, many of our schools that are a high population of English language learners have lost a significant amount of funding.
And so there's underfunding going on of all our students in Baltimore, but especially the students whose families are least able to speak up for them because they don't speak, in many cases, don't speak English well, or don't know how to navigate the bureaucracy as well as people who've grown up here. So you have everyone is getting an insufficient education in Baltimore, and then within that, certain groups, students with disabilities, English language learners and other groups are being discriminated against even within an underfunded system for everyone.
When I think about what Montgomery County or the specific schools do for the immigrants, I can't think of anything specifically that they do for those students that they don't do for any other student. This is my 10th year teaching ESOL at the elementary school level in Montgomery County, Maryland. I did not teach ESOL in any other counties before that. Even my student teaching was in Montgomery County. At the two schools I have worked at during that time, the predominant non-English language was Spanish, even though there were many languages represented among the students receiving ESOL services. Both schools had ESOL programs, but at the elementary level, the teacher decides how much support to provide each student based on student need and staff allocation, whereas at the secondary level, it is more cut and dry because the students have a defined ESOL class every day. Both schools have also welcomed newcomers. At my previous school, we had an organization called Linkages to Learning that shared our building, and they were helpful in providing services and resources to our community. Resources and services could include therapy, individual or family, ESOL classes for adults at night, clothing, groceries, assistance with job searches, and putting the families in touch with other community organizations depending on need. One piece that has helped newcomers in this county is that the county has some elementary schools that are dual language schools. There are currently 5 schools with two-way immersion programs, with the non-English language being Spanish. At my current school, we started that program last year in kindergarten, and this year it is in kindergarten and first grade. Every year we roll it out to another grade level. That has been extremely helpful because it allows the newcomer Spanish speakers to feel like the experts half the day. Students receive instruction 50% of the day in English and 50% in Spanish, and not feel as lost as if they were receiving instruction only in English during the whole day.
You can't really start a newcomer program unless you have a cut and paste model that's coming down from the school district, or unless you're investigating on your own time other opportunities. And so there needs to be more guidance and resources at the North Ave district level. There needs to be more opportunities for collaboration between ESOL teachers at different schools. There need to be more funding for ESOL teachers, to hire more ESOL teachers in general, so that they can focus on a lower number of students. I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve the quality of ESOL in Baltimore City schools and in Maryland schools, and there are a lot of great teachers doing that work and some good principals doing that work.
I'm Denora Mendoza. I'm a community school coordinator here at Highlandtown 237. Most of our students have suffered or experienced some sort of trauma, whether they're immigrants or not. There is something going on at home in all of our households, sadly. There are just a few households that you can say, well, this is a great family, nothing is going on, let's say the perfect family. We have a population of over 900 students, and we don't have enough resources. I mean, we have our school counselor and our school social worker and one therapist, which is not enough.
Was we had a father get himself outside his 9-year-old child's school outside Hampstead Hill Academy, and it created an enormous amount of fear and anxiety among our immigrant population. We saw a decline in school attendance.
Political repression of immigrants in our society for decades, not just in the last few years, is a challenge. And so, we're dealing in the classroom with really heavy issues in the ESOL classroom and in other classrooms too. And there's a lot of fear and a lot of trauma. And what's relevant for ESOL is that when you're afraid, it makes it much more difficult to learn. And especially much more difficult to learn a language. The part of your brain that learns a new language kind of shuts down when you're afraid, when you're angry, when you're depressed. And so we see these emotions a lot in our students, and then we wonder, why is it taking them so long to learn? It's like, well, because there's all this systemic problems that are making it, putting their brains and their emotional health in a place where it's more difficult for them to learn than other students. Say that one thing I think is really important when we think about segregation, discrimination, and ESOL, and specifically in the Baltimore City context, is the need for ESOL teachers and ESOL students to build coalitions outside of their ESOL department, outside of their ESOL classrooms, building coalitions of immigrant students and black students, and sometimes black students are immigrant students, and queer students and white students and Asian students, And so the challenge of I think being an educator in Baltimore is knowing that you can never do enough inside the classroom, and you can never do enough to fight for justice for your students outside the classroom. And kind of the challenge is coming to terms and being at peace with that inside yourself.